Why tell horrible stories? Earlier I asked, how do we receive terrible stories? But let's ask the question, why even bother telling them at all? Offred, if you've noticed, becomes really resistant to telling her own story after Jezebel's. On 267, she's really apologetic. I'm sorry there is so much pain in this story. I'm sorry it's in fragments like a body caught in a crossfire or pulled apart by force. But there is nothing I can do to change it. A couple pages later on 271, telling this, I am ashamed of myself. And then on 273, I don't want to be telling this story. And perhaps it's because she thinks that her silence will keep her safe. On 285, she comments in terms of when she's afraid that maybe she's going to be taken next after she hears about what happened to Ofclyn. She says, all I did was know. All I did was not tell. So she should be safe, right? I haven't done anything, I tell myself. Not really. All I did was know. All I did was not tell. Maybe silence will keep her safe. But then on page 293, she seems to reconsider this. I'm tired of keeping silent. There's no one you can protect. Your life has no value to no one. I want it finished. So there's a sense maybe silence keeps her safe, and then maybe she just gives up. Like, she realizes that silence keeps her safe, but maybe I should just, who cares? Like, I can't keep anyone safe. I can't protect. I'm done. Maybe that's why she's so resistant to telling her story after Jezebel's. But I don't actually think that's the case. Because when you think about it, she hears Moira's story at Jezebel's. She hears about how Moira ended up at Jezebel's and what goes on at Jezebel's. And even with that knowledge, even receiving Moira's story with grace and with compassion and with frustration because Moira seems to be giving up and Offred needs Moira to not give up, even with all of that, the hotel room still happens. Offred still has even more demanded of her right upstairs after hearing that story. So what good does Moira telling Moira's story do? Nothing changes. It doesn't change anything for Moira, and it doesn't change anything for Offred. And I actually think that Atwood shares in Offred's skepticism about the power of storytelling because of the academic conference at the end of the book. Now, sometimes readers will skip something that says historical notes at the end of a book, but do not do that with The Handmaid's Tale, because the historical notes are actually a fictional account of an academic conference in the future. And what we see in this academic conference is that all of the same horrible sexist and misogynistic tendencies that were before Gilead, that permeated and shaped Gilead, they continue after Gilead. It seems as if nothing has been learned. The woman is chairing the conference and seeing to all the social events. The distinguished male professor is giving the important keynote address. In his address, he makes all sorts of sexist jokes about the chair of the conference, about Offred. He doubts Offred's story, points to all the reasons why we can't really believe anything she said anyway. All the while perpetuating the same misogyny that was in Gilead. And of course, it's funny because when you think about it, Atwood knows as a writer that a book like The Handmaid's Tale is most likely to be discussed in college classrooms. Like, that's where you're going to read a book like this. And it's as if in the historical notes, she's kind of throwing down the gauntlet for her readers and saying, what good is this going to do? You're going to read these books, you're going to have these discussions, you're going to hear Offred's story, and you're going to walk away. And most likely you're going to be unchanged. And that ending can make this book all the more a lament, a cry of defiance and despair, because there is so much darkness here, and the darkness continues even after Gilead. What do we do with so much darkness? What do we do with lament that draws us into the space of darkness and refuses to give us any light or any hope? I think that cries of despair, the ability to articulate the darkness with such precision and such clarity and such unflinching courage, is actually itself an act of hope. You see, you can't articulate the darkness so clearly without some sense that there must be something else. You can't know that it is darkness unless somehow deep down inside you know there is something different that's light. You can't know how awful Gilead is, how awful the time before is, and how awful the academic conference is without also knowing somewhere deep down in your soul that there is a different way for men and women to be in the world, and that there is a different way to treat each other and a different way to live and structure ourselves and our worlds. And so I think that laments like this are actually, in their perfect presentation of the darkness, really a testimony to the light. Because we can't know this is evil without knowing that something else has to exist, and it must be good. When I think about that, it actually starts to make a lot of sense, though, with some things that we see in the Bible. I think about God in creation, the very beginning of Genesis. In the beginning, when God started creating the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. Do you hear all of that? Darkness, deep, waters. Waters are a symbol of chaos. It is a dark and chaotic world, and the Spirit of God is there. And what are the first things that God says in that dark and chaotic moment? Let there be light. Here's the thing. Even in that darkness that we know is darkness, God's there. The psalmist says, if I descend into the depths of Sheol, even there you will find me. And Jesus even went there too. That's what the tomb's all about. That's why Saturday is so important in the Easter story. Jesus went all the way to death. Not part of the way, not halfway, but even there, even in that darkness. God's been there, and he is there. And that's why you don't need to be afraid, no matter how dark it is. I think Offred knows this, because this is the very last line of her testimony. And so I step up into the darkness within. That's what this whole story has been, all of the darkness that is within her because of what she's seen and experienced. But that's not what the last word is. Also, and so I step up into the darkness within, or else the light. Somehow, maybe, at the other side of this story, there's light. But only if we make it so. Only if we say, let there be light. Only if we, like God, see the darkness and know that it is darkness and be in that darkness, in that space of lament, and then insist upon the light. Not insist that, like, no, this is light, but no, insist upon moving out into the light. So as you finish this novel, I want you to reflect on these questions. What good does hearing someone else's story do? Will you make Offred regret telling her story by going on as if you hadn't heard it like the academics? See, here's the thing. You are now a witness to her story, and that makes you, the reader, responsible. Will you try to keep yourself safe by remaining silent? Or will you bear witness to the lament, the cry of despair and defiance that you have received, and start working for justice and redemption? Will you help to bring in the light?